What do you think the single biggest barrier to success is for high performers? Hi, I'm Mo Hassan, and I've been teaching executives and managers across private and public sectors for over 2 decades. And what I've learned over these years working with these people very, very closely is that the single biggest barrier to success for high performers is actually emotional intelligence. And unfortunately, emotional intelligence is not something that is widely understood. It's often confused, and many people have a tendency to understand only parts of it. So, there are three important components of emotional intelligence to understand. And let's get started with the first one. The first is to understand that you have emotion, or rather, more specifically, you experience emotions. And to be even more exact, you as a being are possessing and controlling a body, experiencing a contiguous series of emotional states, and utilizing an intelligence that we call the mind. Let's focus on the experiencing contiguous emotional states for just a moment. What that means is, first, that you experience one emotional state right after the other, right after the other, after the other, after the other. There is no gap in between your emotions. There isn't a period of time where you're alive where you are emotionless. Boredom itself is an emotional state, and unfortunately, not a very great one. We could consider that these emotional states have been around for some time, as human beings have been around for some time. They've been studied extensively, and they can even be charted out to say that there's a state of desired emotions and perhaps undesired emotions. If we were to put them on a scale and we were to say that near the top of the scale, we would find desired emotions such as strong enthusiasm, and how about creativity and being able to play games in life? And there's lots of emotional states that are there at the top. And then somewhere in the middle, you're going to find things like mild enthusiasm, contentment, boredom, perhaps even a little bit of dissatisfaction, or even a little bit of overt hostility. And then we go further down and we can find ourselves into anger and even covert hostility, which is worse than anger. We're just hiding it, we're keeping it covertly. And then we go further and further, and then we end up in states of death and destruction. You see, this is important to understand because you're not exactly a fixed thing. Hopefully, you're not a fixed thing. Unfortunately, a few people are. But for most of us, we're experiencing emotional states that take us on a roller coaster of up and down and up and down. So let's talk about this roller coaster for a second so you can understand it even further. So, one is I want you to imagine that all human emotions exist on a gradient scale. They exist on a little bit and they exist on a lot. This gradient scale is actually circular. So at the very, very top of the scale, if you're going to find things like creation and love and things of that nature, well, you can actually be obsessed with something and love something so much that you end up hating it. And just like at the bottom of the scale, you can end up being full of so much hate and you're obsessed with something so much that you end up actually falling in love with it. Those are the extremes. Most of us are going to be falling somewhere in the middle of the scale in the day to day activities of life. What there's to understand is that you go from one emotional state to another. Then, how do you change? And what changes your emotional state? This is where the work of emotional intelligence really begins. First, we must understand that you exist in two different places on this chart of emotions. There is a persistent place that you belong because that's kind of like what your thermostat is set to. No matter what, you'll have good days, you'll have bad days, but you're kind of going to come back to this place where your emotional state is set. Then there's going to be temporary conditions of beingness. This happens typically because of external situations and external experiences. If all of a sudden your significant other broke up with you, a loved one passed away, you lost your job, your investments took a tanking, it's a good chance that your emotional state is going to drop quite a bit. If the opposite were to be true, your significant other says, "Hey, will you marry me?" and you gladly accept. Your parents gift you a lovely vacation for 2 weeks in your favorite place to go to. And all of a sudden, your boss gives you a raise, your investments are on the rise. You're going to find that no matter if your emotional state is low, temporarily it will spike up to a higher, more desired state. So, We experience a lot of emotions. And the interesting thing is, if you want to see how quickly a human being can change emotional state, just observe a young child. And you'll notice that young children will go from anger and upset to laughter and joy in seconds, in moments, in just a breath. As we become older, we have a tendency to become a little bit more fixed in our ways of being. And if we are fixed in our way of being at a higher level, fabulous. But if we're fixed at a lower level, gosh, this can really create some poor conditions in life to operate in. We're going to talk about why there's such an impact on your life based on the emotional condition that you're operating in. This is very, very important to understand. The emotional state that you're in actually determines the types of communications you're able to participate. It's your emotional state is going to limit and determine the types of communications you can have. And this is another important factor, is that your emotional state is also going to limit the distance or the number of universes that your communication can reach. So it's not only the type of communication, but it's also how far it can go. And please allow me to explain this a little bit more. When you go lower and lower towards death, towards these undesirable emotional states, pain, and we go from anger, then we can go down to apathy, where you just hate everything and everyone. When you're in these undesired emotional states, you will notice for yourself, and please do observe this, look for yourself, that in the moments where life feels the worst, where you feel the worst, your emotional state is the worst, you're limited to only your personal universe. You can't even really talk to other people. You can't really relate to other people. You can't really, even though they're close to you, even though they're friends or they're loved ones. When you're in those deep, deep, undesired emotional states, your universe shrinks down to just your personal universe. And then as you rise above boredom and you rise above contentment, and then you start approaching life with enthusiasm, maybe in the beginning, mild enthusiasm, and then into strong enthusiasm, and into creation itself. As you rise in emotional states, what happens is that your reach goes into other universes. You go from just your personal universe to now you're able to reach your family and your close loved ones. You're able to reach your friends and people at work, and you're able to reach the planet and perhaps even greater lengths. Perhaps you could reach all mankind with your communication. Perhaps you could reach the animal kingdom with love. Perhaps you could even have an impact in other spiritual aspects. If you are in an emotional state that has you very much grounded to just your personal universe, and you're trying to do things in the outside universe, you're going to create a very uncomfortable existence. Your emotional state has a significant impact. And if you look for yourself, you'll see this to be true in all aspects of life. Then the other part of your understanding that you're experiencing emotions that's very important is to know that there is an amplitude of that emotional tonality. We have that emotional state, the tonality, the frequency itself, and then we have an amplitude. How loud is it? Are you a little bit angry or are you a lot angry? Are you a little bit enthusiastic or are you a whole lot enthusiastic? There's an amplitude there that exists. So it's a good idea, as often as one can observe about themselves, to know when you're experiencing these undesired emotional states so that you can actually do something about it. And that's actually going to be the second part of our 3 parts of what is emotional intelligence and how do we address this biggest barrier to our success as high performers. So if this topic interests you and you want to learn more, please be sure to watch part 2 of this video.